Hey boys and girls, I am going to make today a painting, a landscape painting of kind of a mountain scene with a river. And so I always like to look at some pictures first. So here are some pictures that I have that I included in our slideshow, our landscape slideshow. This is real photographs of land. I kind of like how the layers of the land are. You can see here, there's like a line here, there's a line here. You can kind of see the lines here where there's peaks and valleys with this type of land, and even this one too, you can just kind of see there's just different shades of green, different shades of kind of brown, and here's a mountain as well. So gives you an idea of what all these colors look like. And what I want you to start noticing is how the land is highlighted by the sun, or how the light affects it, and what blocks the light, the clouds, how that affects what our landscapes look like. So I'm gonna just kind of keep that in mind when I'm painting. But I'm gonna make it very simple on myself. I'm just gonna make a couple of land lines. So I think I'm going to start with just one that kind of goes across my paper. Not perfect. Then I think I'm gonna make another one kind of come up like this, and then maybe just another one kind of meet it here. And then I'll probably kind of let this be a little bit of a river area. And rivers aren't super wide when you are looking at a landscape a lot of times. So I'm gonna leave room for some mountains. And where my mountains are gonna come, that probably is gonna be pretty flat based on the fact that the water kind of stays flat unless it's really, moves into a different shape. But I'm gonna leave it like that. It helps me with one of these first times kind of knowing what I want for my landscape. And then this is going to be my mountain, and then this probably will be the horizon line there of water where the sky will meet. Okay, so I've got that down, just a couple of simple lines. And now I'm going to start my color mixing, and when I'm going to start off with a medium-sized brush, nothing too small, nothing big, because I really want to have control over my paint. I'm just going to start by adding first some of this kind of appley green color, and I'm going to start close to me. I'm doing foreground, middle ground, and background is what I want you to have in your landscapes, and this is definitely the foreground, most forward. And so when I put this paint down, if I just keep painting it back and forth like this, it's going to look real flat. It's just going to be one color. So I definitely want to dip in some white, and the highlight would be probably towards more of the top of that area, the top of that hill, because that's where the sun, and I haven't even drawn the sun in my picture yet, but the sun will highlight the top. And then I might want to add a little bit of the dark lower. And even though the dark sections are lower, you still can add white to those colors. And that helps because there is a lot of changing. It could be clouds, or like the lights and darks can change a lot based on clouds, or just how the landscape is, how many little peaks and valleys there are, even on a little tiny section. And you can let those greens kind of mix all over. That's how you want to have a mixy kind of landscape. I'm kind of thinning this down a little bit. If I wanted to be more brushy with it and show more brush strokes, once I get this kind of filled in here, that's when I like to maybe kind of mix a color. I always like to mix with a little bit of white. If I want to do some like strokes, I can add those to it. Mix up another light kind of tone. Just add some lights and darks to this. A few extra, not a bunch. And a lot of times what I like to do is let my paintbrush dry a little bit and do what's called a dry brush technique too. So one way to get your brush dry is just kind of wipe it off a little bit, get a little bit on the tip, and kind of let that brush be a little dry as you rub it against the paper. It works a little bit better once your paint's a little dry. I'll come back to that. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to go on to this next one here and do the same thing. One thing that you can do to add to your darks is to add a little bit of a contrasting color. So I'm going to still do my lights up high, but as I come down and do my darks, I'm not just going to pick up my darker green, because I have two greens in my my paint palette here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of purple to it, or a little bit of just a tiny bit of blue, but purple really works, I think, well with green. So I've got just a tiny little bit on there, and that brings it down a notch, makes it a little bit earthier, kind of brown, not totally, but green is made from blue and yellow, two of the primary colors, and purple is made from blue and red, two of the primary colors. And if you think about our opposite colors, purple and orange, or purple and yellow are opposites, and green and red are opposites. And so really you've got a lot of opposite colors in those two colors, so that will give you kind of a little bit of a natural brown. So if I want to lighten that up, I just clean my brush off a little bit, take a little bit more white, add a little bit more white up there, take a little bit more of my apple green if I want to kind of brighten that up a little bit. There we go. Kind of like how that's looking. And if I want to clean off my brush a little bit and add kind of some little wisps of my dry brush down here, maybe even down here. I didn't add any purple down there, so if I wanted to just kind of get a little, I don't know if I got much on there, a little kind of, some little flecks of that down here, little variety. Yep, and I'm going to actually add some actual grass here in a little bit too. I'll probably do that for sure with some of the darker colors too. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to go on to this one now. I'm going to make sure my brush is kind of clean as I pick up a little bit of the apple green again, yellow green. Kind of go here to make it a little brighter. And add in my darker color. Now, if you keep going back and forth, you're going to really make all these colors that you've just set down one new color. And you don't want one new color for a whole section. You want to see the variety of colors. It's a fine balance between moving your brush across there. So that's something to think about as you're working on this. So let's see, a little extra dark in here, and that looks pretty good. I do think like I need a little bit of a darker rim there, so I'm going to take my brush and kind of clean this off a little bit, or even kind of clean it off by adding little wisps down here, maybe some little wisps of that green up here, little dry brush, and take a little bit of my purple while this is still wet, kind of mix in a little bit of a shadowy valley on that section as it's coming down to kind of hide behind that other section there. And then do a little bit of a get that a little bit lighter. Okay. All right, I'm liking how my land is looking. I will finish that later in probably a part 2. My brush is really full of green, and I'm going to move on to the water. So I'm going to put my brush down, and I'm going to switch over to a new brush for my blues so I don't have any green in my water. Water can be kind of fun, but it's really tempting to just grab the blue and go for it. And I recommend, I've got 2 blues here. I've got like a cobalt blue and a turquoise blue, but I recommend taking a lot of white. And so I picked those colors up, but I really think I need more white first. And I'm just gonna kind of go side to side. As you know, water runs side to side. So I'm gonna keep taking white with a little bit of that color. And if I want to deepen that a little bit, I can deepen those colors a little bit with the colors. Make sure I kind of get that down there. Oops, let me get my color here. All right. I like to dip in both colors when I'm doing this. So if you get a little too dark in one spot, just grab a little bit of white. And I'm dipping little tiny amounts on my brush at a time. I'm not scooping, because you can just keep dipping. But once you get too much paint down, it's really hard to get that smoothed down without having to kind of almost just remove some of it. So I just kind of make it a rule of thumb that every time I dip my brush, I try to dip into a different color. So this is starting to look a little bit watery. Get a little bit more cobalt blue. That looks pretty dark blue, and it's gonna look a little flat if I don't put a little white in it. A little natural, because of course if it's daytime, and it is in my picture, you're gonna have a highlight down there. So getting this almost done. And this definitely, water is a great spot to do some dry brush. So this, I've been using kind of a bigger brush here, and I think I'm going to switch over here in a second. I'm going to add a little bit more white to a smaller brush for this next dry brush. So I'm going to set this one down and take another flat, but this one's a little smaller. I'm going to take a little bit of white and let that kind of mix up with my colors here. And I'm going to let my brush look just kind of like that, and then I'm just going to kind of make some little wisps of some water, maybe some little darker ones. And as the paint dries, as I said, it'll start to show some of those little wisps, because water is constantly moving. If you've got fish moving in there, it's constantly kind of finding it's kind of getting agitated and it's moving. If you have a boat, boats of course move the water. You want to just show that there's always a little bit of current. And you can kind of do that with just a few little wisps of dark and of light. So I'm going to take a little bit of white, do the same thing. Just a few little wisps. It's almost a little too much. If it's a little too much, get your dry brush down. Get it a little drier. It's starting to look a little bit more watery. All right. Okay, well, I'm gonna stop this for now and do part 2. I'm gonna go on to do the mountain and the sky.